time we've done it with jointly with the board of realtors, and I hope this is something we can build on. I know this is the first time we've also done this 4:30 to 6:30 time frame. I think a lot of people that have day jobs can't ever make it to the breakfasts or the lunches. So as we go forward, I'll be moving it around and see how it works. But I want to personally thank each of our legislators for coming out. Delegate Statler, Senator Clements, Delegate Fleischow, Delegate Williams, let's see if I can do this without messing up. Delegate Summers, Delegate Fritsch, Senator Seibold, and Senator Beach. We thank you very much for taking your time and coming out. I also want to recognize from Gayla Adrian from the Board of Realtors. You want to say a few things?
I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity for co-hosting this event, because I think we do go hand in hand in our community as far as working together. Obviously, we're out on the roads every single day in our cars, and we hear a lot of people, listen to a lot of people on a daily basis. So I think we have a great streamline of venting that we can do for one another. So I think it's very advantageous. And again, I thank you for the opportunity, and we're looking forward to it.
Thank you. And I also want to introduce the President-elect, Melissa Ruby. Did I get that right, Melissa?
Ruby. That's very good.
Ruby, I got that right.
Yes, I'm Melissa Ruby. I am following in the esteemed footsteps of Gayla next year. I did attend this last year for the breakfast, so I'm looking forward to hearing how it is again and hopefully continuing it next year.
Thank you very much, and we'll move forward on this. I also want to introduce our moderators. I want to appreciate very much Libby Durr. Yes. I said that right. Okay. She's our new co-chair for our Government Affairs Committee. So I'm very, very happy to have her, and I appreciate our President, Steve LeCagnon, to be our moderators. And I won't waste any more time. Yes?
Elder, I wonder if you could just take a moment and recognize two folks here at the back of the room who come up from Fairmont. With
yes.
Pierpont Community College. If they'll
Please,
stand and let the...
Thank you, Bob. You all want to say something?
Their names?
Your names?
Lolly Grandstaff. I'm the Vice President of Student Services with Pierpont. Just want to thank all of you for having us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming.
I'm Rob Wigger. I'm the Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Pierpont Community Technical College. And we're just happy to be involved in these type of events so we can keep in touch with everybody in the community. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming. And I think you all know the format, or we're trying to move along, but I'm going to turn everything over to Steve right now. Steve.
All right, thank you very much. I think you all know it's going to be 2 minutes per answer. We're going to try to go down the line, but to the extent one of you feels the need to jump in, that's perfectly all right. We're going to hold folks to 2 minutes, and the enforcer is sitting right next to me. So she's going to give you a 20-second warning when that happens. You don't necessarily have to go 2 minutes on every answer, and in fact, if you want to pass to another legislator to answer a question that he or she may have more knowledge about, you're welcome to do that. So given that, let's go ahead and get started with Delegate Statler. Building our workforce, specifically the opioid crisis. We'd like you to focus on funding and facility, and particularly facility funding for Mylan Park and similar operations in the region, and your position on Fresh Start legislation. That's a whole bunch of things to cover.
Boy, yeah, I'd say, well, to start with, the thing that we have to do for the opioid crisis that's out there, we've got to put the money to it it's going to take to work on that issue. We can't underfund that. We're going to have to spend what it takes to get us out of it and get us moving again. I think part of that is by workforce. I know there's some that doesn't believe that that's a proper way of doing it, but I do believe that part of our problem is that we need all of our people gainfully employed if they have the opportunity to do it. And I believe in order to do that, to get to where you're going to be able to get the employment out there and businesses coming into West Virginia, we have lots of things that we got to work on. And as the lady said there earlier, one of the reasons is it's going to be the roads and transportation, the infrastructure altogether. And we've got to really work hard on that to get that done. The next thing is education. If we're ever going to accomplish our goals and get workforce and businesses coming into West Virginia, we have to have a well-educated workforce. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's all going to be 4-year or 2-year, but we've got to have vocational, we've got to have all of it together in a rounded area so that we can get our people trained to do the jobs that we're going to need into the future. And of course, you know, along with infrastructure, you know, broadband. We've got to look at that. I don't know what's going to take to move that forward, but again, that is a critical part of all of it. You've got to have the technology available to the businesses as they come in.
Thank you. Now, if we could, if there's anybody else at the table that would like to elaborate on exactly what happened concerning the opioid crisis in the legislature this year, please feel free to chime in. Delegate Summers.
Thank you. In the past 4 years that I've been there, there have been many bills passed in regard to this, and not that I think government can fix this problem, but we're trying to be a little bit a part of the solution. So this year our focus was on, we're still seeing a lot of pills in society. We have decreased 50 million pills in the last year that are being put out there, but we were still seeing too many. So this year we had a bill where we are limiting the number of days that people can prescribe, and we met all throughout the whole year with different stakeholders talking about that, because originally we had ER doctors could only prescribe 3 days, and we started thinking about if you had a bad fracture and it was on Friday, so we made it 4 days so they could get to the orthopedic person. But that was our focus this year, was to decrease the number of prescriptions. There were studies out there that said after 5 days is when people start to have addictive behavior. So decrease those to 4 days for ERs, 4 days for urgent care, 7 days for your physician who knows you well and prescribes for you. Chronic pain, we left the same. However, those people are getting that medicine, they'll continue to be able to do that. And we expanded how we're using our controlled substance monitoring database. We're going to be flagging people more. We're going to be turning those over to the boards are going to have access to that. Board of Medicine is going to be able to check on their people, and we made it so that they're going to be able to discipline them more. So that was the big bill that we had this year that we worked on all during the interim time period to get that, worked with all the different people to get that what we felt was right.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about a new issue. You know, this really hit our state incredibly hard. Although first I would like to thank everybody who's involved with this for hosting us and for coming today, and I hope we get a chance to listen, because you probably have learned a lot when you're out driving or on the roads. I know what you're going to say about that. But and the issue I'd like to talk about is something that Amy and I heard about in the Health and Human Resources Committee, and that is the issue of children who are affected by the opioid crisis. We have some pretty scary statistics, and we didn't used to have a childhood abuse neglect problem that was really any different from other states, but now we really do. There are 40,000 cases this year, and there are only 350,000 children. 83% of those are in part because of drugs. And we have the highest rate of removal of children from the home in the whole country. And there are lots of cases where that is the best option, but when children get into the foster care system, we don't have enough people who are doing foster care. We don't have enough child protective service workers. We don't pay them enough. And those kids get caught up into that system, and they're going to be angry. If you were yanked out of your home, you'd be pretty upset too, even if, you know, you're going to love your parents no matter what. So that is a really big issue that we are going to have to invest in if we don't want those children to be drug addicts, criminals, or we want we want the best outcome for those children, and right now, the outcomes in foster care aren't so good.
Thank you. The next...
Excuse me.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm Cindy Fritsch. I also serve on the Health Committee. I'm the newest member of the House Health Committee. I serve on the Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse Committee and the Finance Committee, which are all relevant to this issue, and other committees. In addition to that was a governor's bill that Amy addressed that also limits, I believe, dentists and ophthalmologists, et cetera, to a 3-day prescription. We also passed another governor's bill to make sure the EMS has Narcan available, and when someone is administered Narcan, this is a life-saving drug that can bring you out of it puts you into immediate withdrawal from an opioid overdose. It can bring you back to life. To make sure that they have the drug to administer, but also to formulate teams that can follow up with the person who is revived and try to get them into treatment and visit their families, visit them in their home environment. So that hopefully that will help. And this drug epidemic is devastating to our workforce, so I'm glad you're asking about it. In addition, serving on finance, I was very pleased that we put $10 million, at the end of the session, we put $10 million into the current year's budget to fund the Office of Drug Control Policy. Now, I was the lead sponsor of the bill last year that created the Office of Drug Control Policy and the DHHR, which will be formulating policies to deal with this terrible problem. And I'm so very proud of that bill. It's dealing with educating children in school to make sure they try to make sure they don't start on drugs. It involves treatment. We funded treatment beds, but treatment beds, having them available, isn't even the total solution. It is so hard to get someone into treatment. So that's where we have to move to next. And I've sponsored many bills to enhance penalties and to prevent drug kings from focusing on West Virginians to sell them drugs. And hopefully I'll be able to say more about this drug epidemic in the wrap-up. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move to another topic at this point, and that is affordable housing and actions around cost containment or improved infrastructure. Senator Clements.
Thank you very much. I know that most of you know that I've been heavily involved in infrastructure for the last 20 years, particularly, in the area. And we are seeing in our area now with the development of this natural gas field a tremendous need for housing. And it is something that we don't have in our area, and particularly in the rural parts of West Virginia. We had some people that came to, just as an example, not permanent housing, but the closest hotel room they could get to New Martinsville was in St. Clairsville. So you can see that there's going to be a tremendous demand for housing as this natural gas industry develops, not only in West Virginia, but also in Pennsylvania and Ohio. A lot of times there is not real good locations for housing, but I think that it's something that we will definitely have to address to make sure that we can take advantage of the opportunities that we're going to get with the natural gas development in our area.
All right, is there anyone else who would like to weigh in on what the legislature accomplished or failed to accomplish regarding this issue in this last session? Hearing none, we'll move to the next question, and that is a question submitted by the Board of Realtors. And that question is, do you foresee anything changing in the landlord-tenant law in the near future? Has there been a task force created to study that issue? Delegate Fleischauer, I think you're next.
I don't know of a lot of things going on, but one issue was raised during the flood, and that was raised by the law school clinic, that they found out, and I'm trying to remember the terminology for it, when it's called rent to own. And I don't know how common that is around here or even anywhere, but they found out that there were some people that were very harmed or taken advantage of in that kind of situation where you say that you're going to stay in the house and you're going to work on it, and we don't have a law that regulates that. So you know, that it seems like you should be able to do that, but when the house is destroyed and you've invested all this money, the owner would be the only one that would be reimbursed. So there has been, I worked with the chair of judiciary to work on this issue, but other than that, I don't think there's been, and we couldn't figure it out. I mean, we didn't have a solution that everybody was happy with, but that's an issue that I think fairness would say we should try to find a better solution than we have right now. Other states do.
Thank you. Anybody else care to weigh in on that question? Hearing none. Appalachian HUB and state funding.
Appalachian HUB and state funding?
Yes, sir.
I'm not too familiar with the issue, but it's something that I'd be happy to talk with anyone if they have more ideas on it. I think in terms of funding of any kind, we must make it the priority of the state to invest in people. Look at the investments that we're making. We did that with the teachers throughout the 60-day session with what we were doing with them, and I think that if anyone would like to talk to me after the meeting about it, I'd be more than open to do so.
Anybody else care to weigh in on the Appalachian Hub and state funding for it? Delegate or Senator Beach.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, no, just for clarification, I think John brings up a very good point. Hub is very interchangeable with a lot of organizations. So just for clarification, what exactly are you speaking to? Are you talking about the natural gas industry, the storage hub there?
I think that's exactly what they're getting at with that one.
Okay. Yeah, I think anyone here at the table could probably speak to it because we've all met with WVU at one time and have been given an update on what we anticipate occurring here in northern West Virginia, excuse me. I think what we have to do right now, we're not talking any dollars and cents. I think really right now the argument is, and the ball is strictly in the court of what China may be doing, what WVU may be able to bring to the table. But I think we all have to be careful what's going on just across the state line in Pennsylvania, in Greene County and Washington County. First part of June, they're supposed to have some large economic development that is around the hub issue. And I think members of the chamber, members of this legislature should be sitting in that audience to find out ahead of time exactly what's going to occur or what they're trying to do.
Thank you. Anybody else care to weigh in on that? Senator Seibold?
Thank you. Yes, on the natural gas hub, or actually natural gas liquids is more appropriate. As a director, one of the directors of the Southern States Energy Board, I had sponsored a resolution last year which was passed to send recommendations to Congress to designate our area as a natural gas hub, which basically would, if that were to take place, would provide us a good opportunity for downstream manufacturing and the use of our natural resources instead of simply severing them and sending them out of state. And I think that is vitally important to the growth of our state.
Thank you. Senator Clements.
Yes. Actually, we talk about this natural gas hub. We should call it an ethane storage hub because ethane is so volatile it can't be stored above ground. And so they have found areas that are very suitable in northern West Virginia. And the best way that we can take advantage of this natural place to store this ethane is for us to continue to make West Virginia a more attractive state. We are in competition with other states for other industries. And I know living in the Ohio Valley, so often we see people talk about the fact that Ohio River, we look at it as a barrier, but really the Ohio River is probably the biggest asset the state of West Virginia has. And it really can develop so much there. And I hate to use this term with the natural gas industry, and I quit saying if and start saying when they develop that cracker plant in Dilly's Bottom, Ohio, I look for this whole northern part of West Virginia to explode with industrial development because the people that are working with the Chinese delegation, they want to see the development of industry here within our state. They're not necessarily interested in coming in and taking all of our gas and all of our ethane, but they want to see They want to see development. We need to see development, and we need just to continue to work to make sure that when people look at the state of West Virginia, they see what we are and what we can be.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Delegate Fritsch?
Thank you. Yes, currently the natural gas severance tax revenues are down, and that's basically because of a lack of distribution methods. So a storage hub would be very important and vital to our state. Ohio and Pennsylvania really, we're not competing well with them right now. Most of the development currently is in those states, and we have a great future if we could have a way to distribute it and store the ethane and actually get a cracker plant here, or be able to work with cracker plants close to the border to echo what prior senators have said, to echo the downstream manufacturing facilities and jobs that will be so important to the recovery of West Virginia. So this is a very important issue. As far as state funding of the hub, that's a totally different question that I'm unable to answer right now. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else that wants to weigh in on that one?
May I speak again on this
Absolutely, go right ahead.
At noon today, I was at the, I'm not even going to say it, the Oil and Natural Gas Association luncheon at Ogilvy Park in Wheeling. And Secretary of Commerce Thrasher spoke there today. And he said that they are in the process now of developing an inventory of developable flat land in West Virginia. He said when he came, they didn't have an inventory. So someone would come up and want to find a place to develop, they would basically just have to get in the car and drive around and look or listen. But now he's developing an inventory, and they're working on things like that, and that can be very important. There's a lot of the lack of land or knowing where that land is right now is something I think that's holding us back just a little bit.
All right, that's good to know. The next topic that we're going to turn to is the Roads to Prosperity Accountability Plan, and I think that's Delegate Summers.
Okay. As far as an accountability plan, you are probably aware that our state auditor, J.B. McCuskey, has set up a website to track all government money, checkbook.gov. In that part of that system, he is going to make available for everyone to be able to see on the internet what bids have been bid out, where's the money going, what's been spent, a way for all of us to have transparency on what's happening. I don't think that the projects that came out are 100% written in stone. I think that those have the ability to change, so we'll want to watch that closely. In the district where I am in 49, we didn't get any road bond money. And the people in Taylor County are concerned, and just like you are, you're going to have big projects built, but we're still not maintaining our secondary roads. It's a little bit frustrating, and many of us have shared that in the legislature, that we understand bridges need repaired, we understand these big projects that need to take place, but we're still not getting to our other roads. So we'll continue to have that, I won't say fight, but that debate with the DOH and funding, and how can we make that happen.
Yes, Delegate Williams.
Thank you very much. I think it's vital that we have the DOH follow through on the projects that they said they would be doing. And with that, even before the road bond, myself, Delegate Fleischhauer, Delegate Statler was there. We met with Secretary of Transportation Tom Smith about following through on these projects, because as I indicated, if they don't follow through on this, then this is the end of public trust with the DOH. And this is a relationship that needs to be fostered, that needs to be strong, so that the public does believe in what the DOH is doing, believes in their mission. And with that, the aforementioned delegates, myself, Rodney Piles, we've met with stakeholders to try to talk about how we can advocate for the projects that were listed as priorities, how we can continue to advocate to the Transportation Secretary that it's vital for Mon County that those projects are completed and that the promise that was made is seen to.
Another piece of that issue that a lot of people don't understand is the bond money. We're borrowing money for 30 years, and you can't patch roads that are going to need to be fixed, or even pave repave roads that are going to need to be fixed in 7. So part of the thinking is we will get this federal match money, and then we can use other money that we collect from license fees and so on to do the repair work that is so needed. Right now, the asphalt plants are just opening because of the weather. I mean, we had a frost yesterday. So a lot of we are getting lots and lots of complaints from people, and I certainly am really concerned about my roads. I don't think we are there yet, especially in Mon County, and also I think in Preston County things are particularly bad, but that's sort of an update. The road bond will not be used so much for the maintenance that most people want the most.
Delegate Frisch.
Oh, yes, thank you. Delegate Summers mentioned the auditor's website for accountability. I would like to mention that I sponsored the legislation that passed and became law supporting the auditor's accountability on government spending. And in addition, I believe the bond will be floated around May 15th, sometime around there. And I recall in the budget that each year we are budgeting $69 million approximately to finance the bond. And none of the spending on the bond is actually in the state budget, which I find interesting. So it's important for the auditor's website. And in addition, serving on the House Finance Committee, Montague County has a lot of the trouble with the maintenance of roads, as you've been reading in the paper, has to do with not having enough employees with the DOH, not paying them enough. Well, when we were in Charleston and dealing with pay raises this year, I had the opportunity several times in the Finance Committee and did so to direct questions to the Division of Highways about pay raises for Division of Highways employees. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the pay raises that the legislature appropriated are general revenue. The state road fund is not general revenue, and other special revenue accounts are not general revenue. So I was constantly asking those questions as well. I was the legislator doing this. Asking, will there be pay raises for folks, state employees, who are not funded by general revenue? So it was my understanding that the governor has to just tell the agencies, I don't know if it has to be a proclamation or what, to give the pay raises. And we passed legislation in a special session to help the Division of Highways to allow them more flexibility in their hiring process. And there really did not seem to be any progress. As a matter of fact, they had gone backwards. So it's been very frustrating to me. I've been trying to do what I can.
Thank you. We're going to switch gears.
One thing I would like to add, if you don't mind, while the bond money is being spent on major projects throughout the state, by using that bond money, we have freed up a large portion of that $1 billion general budget that we would have had to spend on these major projects that will help these back roads. And I know that the Department of Highways is working with the natural gas companies to get them to partner with them to help maintain these roads, because they're taking a beating, particularly in the western end of Mon County and that part. But the bond money that's being spent on the major products frees up other money for secondary roads, and that's an important factor.
Since this topic is one that we're all keenly interested in, Senator Beach, you have something to say as well?
Just real quick, and as you had mentioned, we do like to talk about roads just as much as the public does. But we're just trying to set the record straight, because obviously we get a lot of phone calls on the potholes and when the work's going to be done. But just a couple of things. I know Senator Seipholt was one of those who co-sponsored the piece of legislation, and it was just happened to be 8 months before we passed this road bond amendment in regards to creating an oversight commission to basically keep an eye on DOH projects. So that allows us during the interims to bring anyone in who's associated with these projects or associated with the DOH and ask very specific questions in regards to these projects, and that includes when the bonds are going to be passed out and moving forward there. Also, obviously, we do have a labor problem across the state of West Virginia, and I just happened to attend an AFT service personnel meeting last evening, and the gentleman in the crowd, who's a bus driver, says, "Why can I not drive for the Department of Highways through the summer months?" And I don't think the question had ever been asked. So while I'm sitting there, we're still having the conversation, I shoot a message to the Department of Highways, and they jumped right on that. Further conversation this morning leads to the fact that we do have to work out some agreement with each individual Board of Education to allow that to occur during the summer months. But that helps us with the labor issue that we're having in the state of West Virginia. And I hope that, hope across the state of West Virginia that all those district garages can take advantage of that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I think, sure.
Thank you. I'll keep it very brief because I think we've pretty well covered everything, except I would like to just mention two quick things. Across the 14th Senatorial District from which I'm elected from, and in my day job, I travel all over north central West Virginia, and I would challenge anyone to come to Preston County. I know none of my constituents will see this, but I challenge them to come to Preston County and ride a day with me. The roads are terrible. Speaking of accountability, not just new tools for accountability, but in the Senate, I know in the House as well, there's a government organization committee, which during interims and during regular session, we frequently have agencies in, including the Highways Department and or Transportation Department, to ask them questions. And they have to come in when we ask them. Additionally, and I don't know if it's like this in the House, but in the Senate, we do have a Transportation and Infrastructure committee which is dedicated solely to those issues, and they keep a pretty close eye on what happens. So it's good to have those tools at our disposal to make sure that accountability is there and things are being taken care of.
All right, great, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would like to say, and Senator Seipold, I would like to see the day when we don't worry about traveling to see how bad the roads are, that we can travel each other's roads and brag about how good they are. Right. But the thing that I would like to say is, there was legislation that was passed in order to fund the bond. That was a key part of it, and that went into place whether the bond passed or not. So that's been in place now over about a year, and so those funds have been made available to the DOH to do work ahead of time. And what I'm getting a lot of questions of is people are starting to pay their fees for their license and then some other things, and they're seeing they're doubled, and they've got questions as to why that is. And originally, that's what that's for, is to pay off that bond, but it has helped to put more money into the DOH in the meantime while we're waiting on the bonds and when we start making payments on those.
All right, thank you. Now, I think we are ready at this point to switch to the next topic. We're going to switch it up, and somebody from the Board of Realtors may have to clarify on this, but the question is, are there any mandatory disclosure bills that were passed in this last session? Do you have opinions on mandatory disclosures? And is there confusion about what that question really is asking? Okay, someone from the Board of Realtors, mandatory disclosures.
In the state of West Virginia, when you are selling a parcel or any kind of real estate, there is either a land disclosure or a seller's disclosure in which the seller will complete to let the new buyer know of any defects or deficiencies of the property. But what has happened is not mandatory. It's not a state guideline. So sometimes you can purchase a property and the seller does not fill out a seller's disclosure. And I guess that's where we were kind of leaning toward getting, if there's any possible future insight on maybe getting it more mandatory than more of a volunteer basis.
For consumer protection.
Yes.
Yes, Delegate Summers.
If we pass the law, it'll be mandatory. So if someone from your organization wants to get with one of us and help us draft something, what would be the appropriate language that could be there, that's something that any of us could assist you with.
Great. Anybody else on that issue? Senator Seipold.
Thank you. Just briefly, maybe this is more of a question than an answer, but it seems to me that anytime you finance through a FDIC-insured bank, that they require that already. So that, and I see people shaking their head. No, I'm not a real estate professional, so I don't have that answer. But and I'm also assuming that the mandatory disclosure would only be if the seller was aware of something. Basically, you're disclosing anything you know.
Well, if the seller actually resides in the home. Now, obviously, we have many investors that purchase property, and it's all his intention is just rental. And of course, they obviously wouldn't be obligated. But whenever a seller is actually living in the property, it would be probably more helpful just for protection.
So you're speaking of residents then? I see. Yeah. Very good. I'd like to know more about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to move to governmental efficiencies, intergovernmental agreements, and incentives for consolidation, and that would be Delegate Frisch, I believe.
Well, I have a question. Is this the metro government legislation that was moving through the legislature several years ago?
Eldon doesn't want to use that term anymore. He
But
likes,
it must
he
be the
likes
metro
governmental
government
efficiencies.
legislation that was moving through the legislature several years ago.
So yeah,
And
you
obviously
guessed
not
correctly.
popular.
You guessed correctly.
The lead sponsor of that bill is a senator who no longer is serving with us. He's on the PSC, Public Service Commission. So I haven't seen that legislation for a while. We have dealt with other issues with home rule, et cetera, and smaller classes of cities tried to be added recently, and that kind of fell apart at the last minute. It did not pass the legislature. It was several years ago.
Thank you. Senator Seipel.
Thank you. Yeah, just like Delegate Frisch had mentioned, we haven't seen much of that bill for the last couple of years. However, there might be another efficiency which has been talked about in the last few years, talking about combining multiple counties, maybe 2 or 3 counties combining together, having one government instead of 3. I'm certainly not opposed to that. Of course, it's always difficult to convince a person to give up their turf. I've often wondered, you know, and this is just me thinking as I drive down the road, what would happen if Morgantown, Westover, Star City, and Granville would all combine? That would be a force to be contended with. It would probably be the largest city in West Virginia at that point, and it would have quite a bit of political clout. So I don't know if I'm planting the seed to maybe combine those, but it seems like they're normally fighting with each other instead of working together, fighting for the same dollars. But nonetheless, you know, I think that there's a lot of room for efficiencies in West Virginia. Our government seems to be operated today because the way it is today, because that's the way it was done yesterday and the day before. It's just the way we do things, and maybe thinking outside the box is long past due.
Yeah, and I think if you were going to do that, you might want to include Granville as well.
Did I miss that? I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. You don't need it. That's okay. Delegate Fleischhauer.
Well, one thing we can do is we can work piecemeal to make it clear that when there are disagreements about turf, that agreements are allowed. And one bill that our entire House delegation sponsored had to do with the Joint Airport Hazard Comprehensive Plan bill. And what that bill did was, it has to do with the fact that we have a city airport, but when planes come in, they're going to be traveling over county property. And we don't really want someone to build a 10-story building that could make it unsafe to land. So we did pass that bill this year. There have been conversations about working with highways, and it may be that, you know, I've heard that conversation before, Bob, about school districts and even the city, because one of the big problems we have with roads here is that the highway department has a statutory pay proposal, and the city offers much higher wages for truck drivers, and so does the gas industry. So that maybe when people are off in school, we could have we could say, you are allowed to have an agreement, and you know, it should have this, this, and this in it. And I know the city is also interested in it. I can't remember what the angle was, but because the highway department thinks that we are going to be 50% staffed in our county because of the high wages. So we need to do something, and that may be the way to get to more cooperation is to spell it out like that agreements are permitted.
Thank you. Does anybody else care to add to that? Hearing none, then. What single initiative was a priority for you that passed, Senator Seipold, or that failed?
Thank you. It's hard to narrow down to one issue, although I will tell you, second only to roads, the complaints I hear from my constituents are about broadband access and reliable access to broadband. And, you know, I don't want to name any incumbents, but we have passed a couple bills last session which would help allow non-incumbent broadband providers to move into the rural areas and provide service. And then we backed that up with another conduit bill this year, House Bill 4447, which will help alleviate that problem in our underserved areas. Now, I will tell you that I live about 2.5 miles outside of Kingwood. At my office, we have 15 megabit service available. 2.5 miles away, I can't even get broadband. It's not available. Although I live in a district mapped as served. And I think that it's a multi-headed problem, and one of the problems is the incumbents blocking out the non-incumbents, and this other problem is that the maps are just absolutely inaccurate and they need to be reformulated.
Is there anyone else that cares to weigh in on that?
On broadband, or just the general question you posed?
The general question.
Okay.
Or
I didn't want to get into
either or
broadband.
both.
No, you know, before I answer your question, I hope you don't count this on the time clock, but now that I see Eldon sitting back here, I just want to remind folks that this is the 5th year anniversary of our TIF project. And it's a huge project, and I think we've benefited greatly here in this community with that TIF project, but 5 years. But now there's a couple things here, and I've made a few notes, and while Pierpont is sitting here, now I see 3 people here, and one of them being the provost. Is it in regards to Pierpont and I'm going to just call it like it is, a hostile takeover, or at least an attempt to take over Pierpont and what they offer. Pierpont is the only institution, community college institution, that represents 13 counties in the state of West Virginia and north central West Virginia. And they offer a lot of wonderful programs for students across the state, and they do a fantastic job. But we stopped that piece of legislation from happening. Also, we worked on a medical card that will tie in with what's going on with PEIA later on. It'll be a cost savings for the state of West Virginia. And then the one big one that I worked on, and Senator Seipold here also signed on to, was a resolution regarding hemp. And what most folks don't realize is that here in the state of West Virginia and across the United States, we can't transport hemp across state lines. We have no interstate commerce. It's not permitted by law. This piece of legislation would acknowledge that and then move forward with trying to correct it by using a mechanism through the Council of State Governments. And later this year, in July, I will be defending a policy paper that hopefully what will happen is that they'll approve it and will allow us to move forward with the adoption of a piece of legislation that all these 16 states in southern United States can use, and moving this hemp back and forth. But the one crux of the whole process is the fact Congress has to pass it first. They too have to sign off on that piece of legislation. It's not unheard of. It's done many, many times across the United States. So it's an exciting time for us if we can get this going, because what most folks don't realize is that hemp's $1 billion industry, and we import it from all over the world, and it's a big door. And I know a lot of people's eyes glaze over when we start talking agriculture. We're talking $1 billion industry here.
Thank you for that insight, Senators or Delegate Summers.
Thank you. When you were talking about bills that you were excited about getting passed or failed or any of those issues, I did want to talk about the fleet management bill that I was really excited about, because we're talking about a lot of government waste that needs to be reined in. And when we inquired about how many vehicles the state owns, like nobody knew. And there were 3 different numbers given out. 7,500 vehicles state owned by Fleet Management, which was a division. DMV told us we had 10,500 vehicles with active license plates, and our insurer was insuring 12,500 vehicles. So we have a legislation to completely look at that and overhaul and rein that in. We are thought to own $200 million worth of vehicles in our state with really no good accountability to that. So we are going to take that on. You'll see the green plates go away. There'll be new blue and gold plates. In New Jersey called us because they had somebody that got a ticket up there. They went through, with a reader, and they called the state, and they're like, no one has that car. So someone's out there driving a vehicle with our plate on it. So it's just gotten out of control, and we're going to rein that in. So I was very pleased with that. But a bill I was disappointed that didn't pass that I really worked on was reorganizing the DHHR, because being the Vice Chairman of Health, we deal with these people all the time, and it's just a mammoth of an organization. And I understand, like corrections, we've kind of put that back together this year. And DHHR we were trying to take apart. But so many issues are coming through our committee where we need to be able to look at it in smaller chunks, I felt, but that failed.
Thank you. Delegate Williams.
Thank you. Something that I was really happy that passed was the shared tables bill. This bill, I was a co-sponsor of. What it does, it allows boards of education and schools within that district to assign a plan as to what they will do with unused food at the end of the lunch period, and then furthermore with that plan, how they will give that out to students who might be in need of such meals. Experts say that it will be a really critical blow to food insecurity amongst our children, which, I mean, that's something that I think we can all agree on needs to be addressed. So I was very happy about that. Something that I was disappointed that didn't pass was a bill that actually the idea came, I believe, from a chamber member, Jason Donahue, at the pre-legislative meeting that we had in December. That was the bill that established, or would have established, the Mountaineer Trail Network Authority for mountain biking enthusiasts. Part of the problem that we had on this bill is many of the delegates from the southern part of the state, they covet their Hatfield-McCoy trails. It's a big ATV system down there. So we had to convince them to get on board with this and not oppose it, pointing out that this is mountain biking different from ATVs. And it came out of the House, passed out of the House, went over to the Senate, they passed it, and then we weren't able to take it up on the very last night of session. And Delegate Statler, he had to leave the room, but I'm sure he will reintroduce it again, and I'll be glad to be a co-sponsor because I think it's something that we can do to really help our area.
Yes, Delegate Summers.
I would just like to make a comment about that bill. It really just failed in the last night because we ran out of time. And you do see a lot of shenanigans on the last night where people start talking about things that are not necessary to talk about. And what happens is bills die because of that. And this was a really important one for this area. And there was a title problem. And so the House amended that, sent it to the Senate, and we ran out of time for them to accept that or get that back. So those last hours matter. And I think new people coming in that do a lot of that, where they're just talking because they're not happy about one bill, will realize sometimes that you do lose good bills because of it. So it'll easily pass next year. It's already been through the committees, and the people that are returning next year will be familiar with it, so it shouldn't be a problem.
Great. Delegate Fleischauer.
One thing that never even made it to a committee agenda is anti-discrimination legislation because of sexual harassment or sexual orientation. And we're never going to be able to recruit even an outpost of Facebook or Google or any other big 500 company unless we mandate that discrimination is not permitted in West Virginia. That's something we could use help with from the chamber. It didn't even get it on an agenda this year. It's passed the Senate, I think, 3 times. And if we want to be a little bit more modern, we're going to have to move forward on that topic.
Thank you. Senator Cole.
I had 2 pieces of legislation that I worked on. One in particular, and it would take me all night to talk about it, was Senate Bill 360. It created such a rumble in the gas industry that there's a federal lawsuit now trying to overturn it. And basically what 360 did was require the gas company, one in particular, to make sure that the people are paid the proper royalties that they're supposed to be paid, and also that the state gets their severance tax based on a true price of the product being removed at the first sale arm's length transaction. The second piece of legislation was one that the first time I met Commissioner Bloom was at a luncheon at President Gee's house, and he jumped on me real quick about jails. And so I worked with Secretary Sandy, and we got the bill. It actually came out of the House and came over to the Senate, which will change an awful lot of the way that our jails and prisons, we're combining them into one administration, into one operation. Whereas those of you here in Monongalia County, if a police officer picks somebody up and has to take them to jail, they had to take them clear to Doddridge County. So we've removed a police officer from the street for 4 hours by the time he goes to takes that down there and comes back. Under this new consolidation, you'll probably take him to Prunytown, 23 miles, 26 miles down the road. save a lot of time, and this is a big thing which will save the counties millions and millions of dollars over what they're having to do. And I'm sorry, Delegate Fitch, but we're going to have to pick up some jail fees along the way, but it's going to save.
I suspect that Delegate Frisch is going.
Yes, I'm the remaining. Thank you very much. And I support the legislation, as the Senator just spoke of, both of them. Good legislation. And I enjoyed working with Secretary Sandy as the chair of the working group on finance with DMAPS. And I think we were able to get a lot done. He's very easy to work with, very good man. But I passed a lot of bills this year in the past 4 years. But I have to think about the money that I was able to work with on the Finance Committee, and I'm very pleased that I was able to help leverage the pay raises the teachers were requesting, to leverage that to pay raises of an equal aggregate percentage to state workers and to WVU employees. I'm very pleased with that. I'm very pleased with the money I was able to direct to drug treatment and the Office of Drug Control Policy. I think that's the bill that I'm most proud of, and it certainly needed funding. I'm disappointed, however, perhaps in the Greyhound decoupling bill was unable to move this year because the governor would just veto it anyways, I suppose. That's a lot of money that we could save and spend elsewhere. It would have made it easier to give the pay raises, or it could have been more money to drugs and more money to people in need. So that was very disappointing. There's some other, I passed a slew of bills over the past couple years dealing with the drug crisis, because I find that to be a very serious crisis in this state, and I'm very passionate about it. So some of the things I'm still concerned about is a bill that I introduced towards the end of the session. West Virginia is one of the only states where the Attorney General has no power or authority to prosecute crimes, to prosecute drug crimes, to help break up drug crime rings, and maybe that's the missing link. Maybe that's why West Virginia is having such a terrible time. I will introduce that again next year, and I'm looking forward to particularly the governor bills that just passed dealing with drugs, and hopefully those will help us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to move to another topic, and this is from the Board of Realtors. Has there been any consideration about consolidating real estate, insurance, and appraisal entities under one office? Anybody know anything about that effort?
I'm on the Committee on Government Organization, and that's something that we would see, and to my knowledge, in my term, there's been no effort to that effect.
Okay, so probably you need to hear more from the Board of Realtors about that, I'm guessing.
Probably.
All right. Yes, Senator Seipel.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not intimately familiar with that specific topic, but I would tell you, as a going concern for the past couple of years, the legislature has eliminated several, maybe 20 or 30 boards which are ineffective or not being used or not needed anymore, and we have also started the process of combining certain boards which are related. And I know that in other states, many times similar professions are combined under the same board, and they still have their autonomy, but it combines the administrative function and reduces the cost of licensure.
Appreciate that. Anybody else on that issue? If not, we'll turn real quickly to the Small Business Family Protection Bill, HB 4480. That did not get through, as I understand it. Anybody care to comment on that?
I'm sure Delegate Summers can comment on this after I do, because we both spoke to the Vice Chair of Judiciary, who was a co-sponsor along with Delegate Statler on this bill. And Delegate Hanshaw said that there's a lot of problems still with the bill that need to be worked out with respect to liability. And perhaps, since Delegate Summers is on Judiciary, perhaps she could go into more depth.
No, Delegate Fritsch said everything that, but we were checking into the history of that bill and why it had not come before our committee, and that's what the Vice Chairman of Judiciary told us, there were a lot of issues that it was going to create. It had a good idea, but the way it was written, it needed addressed differently. So he said he would take a look at that over the summer and work on it and bring it forward next year.
Thank you. Senator Seipel.
Thank you. Could I start by asking a question?
Certainly.
That bill did not come out of the House, so I'm not intimately familiar with it, but it sounds by the title that it somehow would limit liability for small businesses. Is that correct?
Is that correct, Eldon?
No, currently, right now, one of the changes, it's a judicial standard. There's 21-part test if you are a family business to the 21 different ways that someone can pierce the corporate veil of a family business. And that was established by the judiciary because they treated family businesses different than any other corporate entity. And actually, it was first offered last year by the Senate, and it got through the committee, but then it ran out of time last year. This year, we started just with the judiciary. And basically, what it does is reduces it down to any other corporation instead of having a separate 21-point test. It does away with the court-established 21-point test and establishes a more. For instance, one of the tests is if you're a family business and your family attorney drew up the corporation papers and filed the corporation papers, you have no protection of your house in this family business. Now that's kind of ridiculous because if you're a family business, you're going to go to your family attorney. But those were part of the test. And yes, Delegate Statler and Delegate Hanschel worked very closely on that. They explained some of the issues, and it's really zeroing in down on how to properly deal with the liability being appropriate in comparable to non-family corporations.
I see. Well, thanks for the clarification. I don't serve on judiciary, but I do vaguely remember hearing about this from before. But thank you, and I have no comment.
All right. Senator Beach.
If you put me down, I'd like to go back to the realtors and ask them a question on that seller's disclosure. I just have a question on that.
Ask away.
Thank you. Ladies, let me ask you real quick. If we pass a piece of legislation, does this mean an individual who does not fill out that seller's disclosure can't market their home? How do you anticipate that moving forward?
I can speak to, I have a perspective of working in more than one state. So I can explain to you how a state that it is mandatory. It is. So in the state of Maryland, a seller of a property has to fill out either a disclosure or a disclaimer. If they have not lived in the property, if it's an investment property, if it's a rental property, a flip property, whatever, what have you, then it's a disclaimer. And the point of it is to anything with what we call in the business is latent defects. So something that you can't see by looking at it or having it inspected whether it works. So I would say that if it were introduced, it would be one or the other that you would need to do so that a buyer is protected, that when they buy, that when it's perfectly dry outside, it doesn't rain in a month, and they don't know that water rushes into the basement whenever you get more than a couple inches of rain, that is what it protects them from. So if they haven't lived in it, they have to do a disclaimer stating, I don't know anything about it living in it day to day, but I do know this, or I don't know anything, or fill out a form. The form that we use as a voluntary form is 15 pages of questions that have very, very, very specific about what you know about the property. Does that help?
Yes and no, because I'm thinking of that cantankerous individual, that cantankerous seller. No, you never do. And you go in and you sit down with them and you're making your pitch to market their home, and they just outright refuse to do a seller's disclosure.
But what that does is it takes the liability, it puts power in the buyer's hands to say, to have, they fill this out and to go and to pursue justice for that, or monetary action or whatever it says, so that, this is obvious, this is, it's not possible that this person didn't know it. And it also takes the liability off of the agents and brokers who have not lived in the house. So it protects the agents and brokers, it protects the buyers, and it also, very honestly, protects the sellers. It is, we always advise our sellers, if you think it needs to be disclosed, to disclose it, because you'd rather them know about it now. But no, we cannot make them, we can't answer the questions for them.
That's right.
We can't fill the thing out for them. But it does then give an avenue of retribution.
Standing. Yeah, use them standing. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
There's one other question that I think we can wrap up with, and then I'll turn this microphone over to Mr. Callen, and that is also dealing with the realtors, and it's a question about whether you all have any thoughts pertaining to independent contractors, such as agents, having to charge a sales tax for services provided to their customers. Anybody care to wade in on that? All right. Well, I'm sure they'll grab you at the end of this and tell you a little bit what they have in mind. Mr. Callen, I thank you all for your patience, and you all were very respectful of the time. I am impressed.
Let's start by thanking the panel and our moderators. Thank you very much. I want to take, before I close, I want to take the opportunity to thank Hilton Garden Inn for providing this room for us. And I want to recognize Amy Mahalik. I'm working on names. I'm getting them. Thank you very much. And please say a few words.
Sure. Again, my name is Amy Mahalik, and I'm the current sales manager here at the Hilton Garden Inn. So I do welcome senators, delegates, members of the chamber, as well as the Morgantown Board of Realtors. And we hope that you had a great event this evening. And afterwards, our bar and grill is open. And so we are under new management with GF Hotels, who also manages Lakeview Resort. And so we're in the process of getting up and running again here. And in the next several months, hopefully we'll be renovating the lobby and moving forward. So again, thank you for coming today, and I'll turn it back over to Eldon.
I have a couple quick messages. Senator Smith Dave, he got tied up in a mine job and he fully intended to be in here. He was the one that requested this afternoon, so I know he was very upset that he couldn't make it, but at the last minute he got tied up. Also, Delegate Powell's had automobile problems today and couldn't get around and to respond to get here in time. However, he did send me a list of things, including most of everything you all mentioned, but the couple things that was not mentioned in his list of things that he thought was important was the changing the alcohol tax distribution and sports betting. You talked about all the others. Does any of you want to address either of those two issues that was before you?
I think you should recognize Senator Clements for that sales tax distribution. He was the lead sponsor on that.
Charlie, go ahead.
Actually, thank you, Bob. That actually came out of the meeting we had with the county commissioners where they couldn't get financial data from the tax department. So the original bill went in with that, and I have to give Joe Statler credit. He came over and says, get this in there as an amendment in there to, so that if it's in the city, it goes to the city. If it's in the county, it goes to the county. Because the way it was before, if you had a bar located within a mile of the city, the liquor tax from that went to that city. Well, look what you've got over here in Morgantown. I bet half the bars over here are within 3 cities, within a mile of 3 cities. So there was a lot of confusion there. And so that was just put on there to basically say, here's the line. If you're in the city, it goes to the city. If you're in the county, it goes to the county. And that was, I think that was a good thing that can happen. There's a lot of unique situations here in this Montague, Morgantown area. It really is.
Isn't that the truth? Does anyone else want to speak to that? How about the sports betting issue? That was the only other thing he was, I think he was talking about failing of the sports betting issue. Did it pass or fail?
Yeah.
Well, there was something that was missing, I guess. I guess he concluded. Can you address that?
Well, there's some rumor that we'll be called into a special session to coincide with the May interims to address whether or not the major sports leagues get a handle. Major League Baseball and the NBA and the NFL, they all wanted 1% off a handle, which my contention is that sports betting does nothing but drive up viewership in their respective markets. They don't need a handle. We pass it the way it is. They can, I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan, but they can go kick rocks as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, anybody else want to kick rocks on that, or get someone to tell them? Okay, are there any questions from the audience that we might have missed? Yes, sir.
Barbara, can you just elaborate a little more on the anti-discrimination legislation? And
Sure, that's pretty easy to do. We have a Human Rights Act that says it's illegal to discriminate in employment, housing, public accommodations. You can't refuse to serve someone because they're black. And this would be the same thing when it comes to sexual orientation. You couldn't refuse to rent to someone because of their sexual orientation. You couldn't refuse to hire from someone. We know that that happens, and we also know that big companies feel very strongly about that, multinational companies. And that, I think it's it hinders establishing a lot of companies here.
so how would that tie into the case that the Supreme Court is going to be reviewing regarding the wedding cake?
The public accommodations case? Well, I think they'll tell us, what they're going to rule on that, and what, whether there is an exception to that based on freedom of religion, which is another constitutional protection. There's an equal protection argument, there's a First Amendment issue, and we will find out, what the court says on it. But
Are they somewhat related then?
I would say that's a real tiny issue, whether or not somebody is going to bake a cake. I mean, it's much more substantial. I mean, I remember litigating issues in this town of people refusing to rent to black students, and a case in Fairmont where the city refused to allow blacks to swim in the pool. And so we are talking about things that are very painful and very hurtful. And, we probably all know somebody who is a lesbian or gay or bisexual who has been hurt by discrimination, and that's what this is designed to do, to say that it's illegal to say that you can't even work or get a house because of something that, because of who you love.
And currently that's the situation in West Virginia.
We don't have any prohibition in our state law at all. Many states, many cities do. And some, I think we have 10 cities that have ordinances, but it's not a state law.
Thanks, Bob.
Barbara went on a little further, mentioned it's in 10 cities, and I think right now Fairmont Fairmont, has it on the ballot in the fall. So it's still an issue that cities are trying to tackle, whereas the West Virginia legislature could just address it in one simple piece of legislation and be done with it.
Any other questions? I just want to again thank you all for coming. These are very important sessions, especially from your chamber, and we very much appreciate the realtors participating. I hope we do this again for the launch. I want to reemphasize the chamber is very issue oriented. We do not deal in endorsing candidates. Rather, we focus on issues and items, and not just what you're answering our requests, but we're open to your requests, like the one you just made, Barbara. We're open to your requests, your ideas. The realtors are the same way. We're open for you to say, hey, I don't have enough information. Give us more information. Or if there's some sort of event or gathering you would think would be necessary to pull together to address a particular issue, we are not focused on Democrat, Republican. We are not that. We are very much about dealing with our members, dealing with our community, dealing with the issues that will make us stronger and better. So I wanted to emphasize that. And again, let's give a hand to our legislators.